The sun cast long, blood-red fingers across the rugged Wyoming landscape, as Shane Norwood rode into Shoshone with a heaviness in his chest that had nothing to do with the two-day journey from Cheyenne. It was 1875, and the war that had torn the nation apart was a decade past, yet Shane still carried its scars, some visible, others buried deep where no one could see them. His stallion, Midnight, was as weary as he was, hooves kicking up dust as they made their way down the main street. Shane's eyes scanned the weathered storefronts, counting the usual suspects. Saloon, general store, sheriff's office, and at the far end, a rickety platform that made his stomach clench, the auction block. He hadn't intended to stop in Shoshone. His destination was further west, where his brother had purchased land for cattle ranching. But Midnight had thrown a shoe, and the approaching night meant they needed shelter. "Whoa," he murmured, pulling up outside the livery. An old man with a tobacco-stained beard emerged, eyeing Shane with the cautious assessment common to frontier towns. "Need boarding for the night," Shane said, dismounting with a grimace as pain shot through his right leg. The liveryman nodded. "2 bits for the horse, including feed." "Another 50 cents gets you the loft." Shane reached into his pocket, producing the coins. "Deal." "Auction's about to start if you're interested," the man said, jerking his head toward the platform. "Got some interesting lots today." "Not my business," Shane replied curtly, unloading his saddlebags. The liveryman shrugged. "Suit yourself. Though word has it there's something special in today's lineup." Shane had no intention of attending any auction. He'd seen enough buying and selling of people during the war to last several lifetimes. Yet as he settled Midnight into a stall, the commotion from the town square grew, voices rising in a mixture of jeers and calls. Curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, pulled him toward the noise. The crowd had gathered around the wooden platform where a large man in a bowler hat was gesticulating wildly. Shane hung back, leaning against a hitching post, telling himself he was just passing time. "And now, gentlemen, the final lot of the day," the auctioneer's voice boomed. "Something different, I must warn you." The crowd parted as 2 men dragged a figure onto the platform. Shane squinted against the setting sun, then straightened abruptly. It was a woman. She stood with her head bowed, dark hair falling forward to shield her face. Her clothes were travel-worn but not threadbare, a simple calico dress that had once been fine. Her hands were bound in front of her with coarse rope. "Now, I know what you're thinking," the auctioneer continued, circling her like a vulture. "But this ain't what you think. This here's no pleasure girl. This is Fiona O'Sullivan, brought west from Boston." The woman flinched at the mention of her name but didn't raise her head. Her passage was paid by the Winslow family, but there's been complications. The auctioneer smirked. "Seems Miss O'Sullivan has gained herself a reputation. They're calling her a witch back east." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Claims to have healing hands, she does," the auctioneer continued. "But after what happened to young Billy Winslow, well, no one will touch her now. His death was most unnatural, they say." The woman's head snapped up then, revealing a face that struck Shane like a physical blow. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 25, with a spray of freckles across pale skin and eyes that blazed green fire. "I did not kill anyone." Her voice rang out clear and strong, with a lilt that betrayed her Irish roots. "Billy Winslow died of the fever that took half the children in Boston. I tried to save him." Silence. The auctioneer struck her across the shoulder with his cane. $5 starting bid for this one. Comes with her own trunk of belongings." Silence fell over the crowd. Men shuffled their feet, exchanged glances. No one spoke. "Come now," the auctioneer cajoled. "She can cook and clean at least, and if her claims are true, might be useful on a farm." Still, no one bid. Women with dark reputations weren't uncommon in the West, but accusations of witchcraft carried weight, even here. $2, the auctioneer said desperately. "Surely someone will take her for $2, Shane watched the woman's face. There was fear there, yes, but something else too, a dignity that refused to bend despite her circumstances. And beneath it all, an exhaustion that resonated with his own. $10. It took Shane a moment to realize the voice was his own. He stepped forward, feeling the eyes of the crowd shift to him. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $10 from the stranger. Do I hear 11? No one spoke. Going once, twice. Sold to the man in the buckskin jacket. Shane walked forward, pulling coins from his pocket. The transaction was quick, the bill of sale scribbled hastily. And then he was standing before the woman Fiona as the auctioneer removed her bonds. Up close, he could see the purplish shadows beneath her eyes, the tension in her slim shoulders. She looked at him warily, rubbing her wrists. Why? She asked simply. Shane wasn't sure of the answer himself. Where's your trunk? She nodded toward a leather-bound chest near the platform steps. Shane picked it up, surprised by its weight. Come on, he said gruffly. I've got a place at the livery for tonight. She followed him silently through the dispersing crowd. Shane could feel the stares, hear the whispers. He just made himself the talk of Shoshone, and not in a good way. At the livery, the old man raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Shane led Fiona up to the loft. It was clean enough, with fresh hay and a horse blanket. You can sleep here, Shane said, setting down her trunk. I'll be downstairs with the horses. She stood in the center of the small space, arms wrapped around herself. What do you want from me? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Nothing, Shane answered honestly. I'm heading to Sweet Creek tomorrow. My brother has land there. I'll take you that far, then you can decide what you want to do. Suspicion clouded her features. You bought me. I paid for your freedom, he corrected. You're not beholden to me, her laugh was bitter. Freedom? Look around you, sir. What freedom does a woman alone have in this place, especially one with my reputation? Shane ran a hand through his dark hair. My name is Shane Norwood. And I don't much care for reputations, Miss O'Sullivan. Just Fiona, she said quietly. He nodded. Get some rest, Fiona, we leave at dawn. As he turned to go, her voice stopped him. Mr. Norwood, he looked back. She was silhouetted against the small window, the last light of day making a halo of her hair. Thank you, she said. Whatever your reasons. Shane merely nodded and descended the ladder, trying to ignore the strange feeling in his chest. He had no business bringing any woman with him to Sweet Creek. His brother would have questions he couldn't answer. But as he settled onto a pile of straw near Midnight's stall, Shane acknowledged the truth. He hadn't been able to stand by and watch another person treated as property, not after what he'd seen in the war. And there had been something in Fiona O'Sullivan's defiant stance that spoke to him, something that mirrored his own battle to remain standing when life seemed determined to knock him down. Morning came too soon, the first light filtering through the cracks in the livery walls. Shane had slept poorly, his dreams haunted by battlefield screams that gradually transformed into a woman's voice calling for help. He rose stiffly, his right leg protesting as it always did at dawn. Midnight whickered softly as Shane checked his hooves. The livery blacksmith had replaced the thrown shoe the previous evening, charging a fair price. The stallion was ready for travel, though the journey to Sweet Creek would take at least 3 days. Mr. Norwood, Fiona's voice came from above. Shane looked up to see her peering down from the loft. Her hair was neatly braided, her face freshly washed, though the same worn dress hung on her slender frame. Just Shane, he replied. Come on down, we should get moving. She descended the ladder with surprising grace, her trunk somehow already beside the stall. Shane raised an eyebrow. I brought it down earlier, she explained. I've been awake since before dawn. Something in her tone suggested she too had battled nightmares. Have you eaten? He asked. She shook her head. I don't require much. Everyone requires food, Shane said firmly. We'll stop at the general store before leaving town. They walked side by side down Shoshone's main street, Midnight following obediently behind. Shane was acutely aware of the stares from early risers, a shopkeeper sweeping his porch, a pair of ranch hands nursing hangovers on a bench. Fiona kept her gaze forward, chin lifted slightly, though Shane noticed how she inched closer to him as they passed a group of men outside the saloon. At the general store, Shane purchased jerky, hardtack, coffee, and to Fiona's evident surprise, a tin of peaches. A luxury, she murmured as he added it to their supplies. Sometimes small comforts make the difference, he replied. Then, after a moment's hesitation, is there anything you need? Her eyes flicked to a shelf of simple toiletries, then away. No. Shane reached for a small cake of soap and a hairbrush, adding them to his purchases. Fiona's cheeks colored slightly, but she didn't protest. As the shopkeeper was wrapping their goods, the bell over the door jingled. A heavy-set man in a sheriff's badge entered, his gaze immediately settling on Fiona. "Miss O'Sullivan," he said, his tone neutral but his eyes hard. "I hear you're leaving our town." "Yes, Sheriff," Fiona replied quietly. The sheriff turned to Shane. "You're taking responsibility for her then?" Something in the question raised Shane's hackles. "She's a free woman." "That may be," the sheriff replied, "but I'd advise caution. There've been telegrams about this one from back east. Strange happenings follow her." "Is she wanted for any crime?" Shane asked directly. The sheriff hesitated. "Not as such, no." "Then we'll be on our way." Shane gathered their supplies, nodding to the shopkeeper. "Good day, Sheriff." Outside, Shane helped Fiona mount Midnight, then handed up her trunk before swinging up behind her. The horse snorted at the added weight, but was strong enough to carry them both. "We'll alternate walking," Shane said as they started down the road leading west. "No sense tiring him out early." Fiona nodded, sitting stiffly in front of him. Shane was careful to maintain a respectful distance, his hands on the reins but not touching her. Still, he couldn't help noticing the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair, or the way her shoulders gradually relaxed as Shoshone disappeared behind them. They rode in silence for the first hour, the landscape opening up around them, rolling hills covered in sage and wildflowers, the distant mountains a blue haze on the horizon. Finally, Shane cleared his throat. "Those accusations," he began carefully, "about healing hands." Fiona tensed again. "What about them? Is there truth to it?" She was quiet for so long that Shane thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was low. "My grandmother taught me about plants and their properties, how to make poultices, tinctures, what herbs can reduce fever or ease pain." She paused. "Most of it is simply knowledge that's been forgotten as doctors with their modern methods take over." "But not all of it," Shane prompted. Fiona sighed. "Sometimes, when I touch someone who's suffering, I can feel where the sickness is, direct the healing where it's needed most." She twisted slightly, looking back at him with apprehension. "You think I'm mad?" "I've seen stranger things," Shane said honestly. "The Arapaho medicine man who saved my leg after Antietam spoke of similar abilities." Surprise flickered across her face. "You fought in the war." "Union cavalry," Shane confirmed. "Got shot up badly in '62. They wanted to take the leg, but a captured Arapaho scout convinced the field surgeon to let him try his methods first." He patted his right thigh. "Still gives me trouble when it rains, but it's attached." Fiona studied him with new interest. "And that's why you didn't dismiss my claims outright." "That," Shane agreed, "and the fact that people fear what they don't understand doesn't mean it isn't real." They fell into a more comfortable silence after that. Around midday, they stopped beside a clear stream to rest and water Midnight. Shane helped Fiona down, again noticing how she seemed to avoid direct contact with his hands. As they shared jerky and hardtack in the shade of a cottonwood tree, Shane found himself studying her profile. There was a stillness about her that seemed at odds with her youth, a watchfulness that spoke of hard experience. "How did you end up at that auction?" he asked finally. Fiona ran a finger along the bark of the tree beside her. "The Winslows brought me from Boston to be a governess for their children. When their youngest boy died despite my care, Mrs. Winslow became convinced I had somehow caused it." Her voice grew bitter. "It was easier to blame me than accept that children die of fever every day." "And Mr. Winslow believed his wife, or pretended to." Her jaw tightened. "He had made advances that I rebuffed. The accusations gave him reason to be rid of me without paying my return fare to Boston." Shane felt a familiar anger rising. "So they abandoned you in Shoshone." "With the helpful suggestion to the town officials that I might be dangerous." Fiona's smile was brittle. "Hence the auction. No one would hire me as a teacher or domestic, but they couldn't simply leave me to starve." "Human decency at its finest," Shane muttered. "You showed more decency than most," Fiona pointed out. "Why?" Shane considered the question as he watched Midnight drink from the stream. "I've seen too many people treated as less than human, during the war after." He met her eyes, couldn't stomach seeing it again. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Something about Fiona O'Sullivan had called to him in a way he couldn't articulate, even to himself. They resumed their journey, this time with Shane walking alongside the horse while Fiona rode. The day grew hotter, the Wyoming sun beating down mercilessly. Shane removed his jacket, revealing a cotton shirt with the right sleeve pinned up where his forearm should have been. He caught Fiona's glance and answered before she could ask. Gettysburg, different battle from the leg. I'm sorry, she said softly. Shane shrugged. I'm alive. Many weren't so fortunate. By late afternoon, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Shane scanned the area, identifying a small stand of trees near the base of a rocky outcropping. We'll make camp there, he decided. That storm's coming in fast. They reached the shelter just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Shane worked quickly, setting up a canvas lean-to between two trees while Fiona gathered firewood. By the time the downpour started in earnest, they had a small fire going and a reasonably dry place to sit. You've done this before, Fiona observed, watching as Shane used his one hand and teeth to secure the last corner of the canvas. My brother and I traveled a lot after the war, Shane replied, settling beside the fire. Couldn't seem to stay in one place. Until now, Daniel, my brother, got married last year, decided it was time to put down roots. Shane poked at the fire with a stick. Bought land in Sweet Creek. Wrote to me a month ago saying he could use help with the cattle. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Midnight whinnied nervously from where he was tethered beneath a nearby tree. Fiona rose gracefully. I'll check on him, she said. Shane watched as she approached the stallion, speaking too softly for him to hear. Midnight calmed immediately, nuzzling her hand. There was something almost magical in the way she soothed the animal, her movements gentle yet confident. When she returned, her dress was damp from the rain, and she shivered slightly as she sat across from Shane. Here, he said, reaching into his saddlebag and extracting a flannel shirt. It's clean, more or less. Fiona accepted it with evident surprise. Thank you. I'll turn around, Shane offered, already shifting to face away from her. He heard the rustle of fabric as she changed, trying not to think about the woman disrobing just feet away from him. It had been a long time since Shane had allowed himself to think of any woman that way. The war had left more than physical scars. You can turn back now, Fiona said after a moment. She was swimming in his shirt, the sleeves rolled up multiple times, but the flannel looked infinitely more comfortable than her wet dress, which she had spread near the fire to dry. Better? Shane asked. She nodded, pulling the collar closer around her neck. Much, thank you. They shared a simple dinner of the remaining jerky and hardtack, with Shane insisting they open the tin of peaches for dessert. Fiona's face lit up at the first sweet bite, a transformation so complete that Shane found himself staring. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. You should smile more often, he said before he could stop himself. It suits you. A blush crept up her cheeks and she looked away. There hasn't been much cause for smiling lately. No, Shane agreed softly. I suppose not. The rain continued through the night, drumming steadily on the canvas above them. They slept on opposite sides of the fire, Shane offering Fiona his bedroll while he made do with his saddle as a pillow. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him. He found himself watching the gentle rise and fall of Fiona's breathing, wondering what dreams visited her. He must have dozed eventually, because the next thing Shane knew, sunlight was filtering through the trees and Fiona was kneeling beside the rekindled fire, a small pot of coffee brewing. You're up early, he said, his voice rough with sleep. She glanced over at him. Old habits. And I thought you might appreciate hot coffee. Shane sat up, running his hand through his hair. You thought right. As they shared breakfast, more hardtack softened in the coffee. Shane noticed Fiona watching him struggle to secure his right sleeve with only one hand. May I? She asked hesitantly. After a moment's pause, Shane nodded. Her fingers were cool against his skin as she carefully pinned the empty sleeve, her touch efficient yet gentle. Thank you, he said, oddly affected by the simple act of assistance. Fiona nodded, her eyes meeting his briefly before she turned away to pack up her things. She had changed back into her dress, now dry though somewhat wrinkled. They made good time that day, the rain having settled the dust and cooled the air. Shane found himself relaxing into Fiona's company. She was observant and knowledgeable about the plants they passed, occasionally pointing out specimens with medicinal properties. "That one," she said, indicating a small purple flower, "can be made into a tincture for headaches." "And that?" Shane asked, nodding toward a shrub with waxy leaves. "For burns," Fiona replied. "The sap creates a protective coating that helps the skin heal." "Useful knowledge out here," Shane commented. "Doctors are few and far between." Fiona's expression darkened slightly. "Some would call it witchcraft. Some are fools," Shane replied simply. Her smile returned, small but genuine. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a section of trail that followed alongside a wide, fast-flowing river. The path narrowed, forcing them to proceed single file, with Shane leading Midnight by the reins and Fiona walking behind. They had just rounded a bend when Shane heard a low, ominous rumble that wasn't thunder. He stopped abruptly, causing Fiona to bump into him. "What is it?" she asked. "Listen," Shane said tensely. The rumbling grew louder, and suddenly Shane understood. "Flash flood," he said urgently. "The rain yesterday," he didn't get to finish. Around the bend upstream came a wall of churning water, carrying debris and uprooted trees. It was still in the riverbed but rising fast. "Higher ground," Shane shouted, grabbing Fiona's arm and pulling her toward a rocky slope to their right. "Move." Midnight whinnied in panic, rearing up. Shane released the reins to prevent being pulled over, and the stallion bolted further down the trail. "Your horse," Fiona cried. "He'll find high ground," Shane assured her, though he wasn't certain. "We need to climb, now." They scrambled up the rocky slope, the loose shale making it treacherous. Shane's right leg protested fiercely, threatening to buckle, but he pushed through the pain. Beside him, Fiona was sure-footed despite her impractical shoes, helping steady him when he faltered. They reached a ledge about 20 feet up just as the water surged over the trail below. From their vantage point, they could see the devastating power of the flood. Trees snapped like twigs, boulders tumbled along like pebbles. "Midnight," Shane murmured, scanning the churning waters for any sign of his horse. Fiona squeezed his shoulder. "He's smart, and he has strong instincts." They watched in silence as the flood continued, the water level rising steadily. Their ledge was safe for now, but Shane eyed the slope above them, calculating whether they could climb higher if necessary. "Look," Fiona suddenly pointed downstream. Shane followed her gaze and felt relief wash over him. Midnight had indeed found high ground, climbing up a gentler slope about a quarter-mile away. The stallion was soaked but appeared uninjured. "Thank God," Shane muttered. "Your supplies?" Fiona asked. "Still in the saddlebags," Shane replied, "but we're separated from him until the water recedes." They settled on the ledge, backs against the rock face, watching the violent spectacle below. The flood showed no signs of abating, the water still rising inch by inch. "It could be hours," Shane said grimly. "Maybe overnight," Fiona nodded, drawing her knees up to her chest. "At least we're alive." "Thanks to your quick feet," Shane acknowledged. "Not many women could have made that climb in a dress and those shoes." "I grew up climbing the cliffs near Cork," Fiona said with a small smile. "My father said I was part mountain goat." Shane found himself wanting to know more. "Is that where you learned about healing?" "In Ireland, partly," Fiona answered. "My grandmother was known as a wise woman in our village, but when the potato blight came," she trailed off, her expression distant. "Too many died despite her knowledge. My parents brought me to America when I was 12, hoping for a better life." "And did they find it?" Fiona's smile turned sad. "My father did well enough as a stonemason in Boston, but the consumption took both him and my mother 5 years ago. I became a governess to support myself." "I'm sorry," Shane said quietly. "What about your family?" Fiona asked. "Besides your brother, I mean." Shane leaned his head back against the rock. "Father died when I was young. Mother raised us on a small farm in Pennsylvania. She remarried after Daniel and I joined the Union Army." He paused. "She passed 2 years ago, peacefully in her sleep." "A blessing," Fiona murmured. They fell into companionable silence, each lost in memories. The sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the flooded valley. The temperature dropped noticeably. "You're cold," Shane observed as Fiona hugged herself tighter. "I'll be fine," she insisted, but her shivering betrayed her. Shane hesitated only briefly before shifting closer, offering his body heat. May I? After a moment's hesitation, Fiona nodded. Shane put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. She stiffened initially, then gradually relaxed, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not treating me like I'm dangerous or damaged." Shane looked down at her, something tightening in his chest. "We're all damaged in some way, Fiona. Doesn't make us dangerous." She tilted her face up to his, her green eyes searching his face. "Some might disagree." "Let them," Shane said simply. He became acutely aware of how close they were, of the warmth of her pressed against him, of the faint lavender scent that still clung to her hair despite their ordeal. For a moment, he thought she might lean closer still, but then she looked away, focusing on the flood below. "It's slowing," she observed. Shane followed her gaze. The water did seem to be receding slightly, the worst of the flood having passed. "Still not safe to try crossing until morning." "So we spend the night here." "Afraid so," Shane replied. "Not the most comfortable accommodations." Fiona's laugh was unexpected and delightful. "I've slept in worse places than a mountainside with a gentleman for company." Shane found himself smiling in response. "I'm not sure everyone would describe me as a gentleman." "You've been nothing but," Fiona said softly. "More than most men would be to a woman they purchased at auction." "I told you I know," she interrupted. "You bought my freedom. Still, others might have expected something in return." Shane felt a flare of anger at the implication. "I would never." "I believe you," Fiona said simply. "That's my point." Night fell fully, the stars emerging in breathtaking profusion overhead. The temperature continued to drop, and despite their shared warmth, both were shivering. "We need to conserve heat," Shane said practically. "Turn toward me." Fiona complied, allowing Shane to wrap his arm more fully around her. She hesitantly placed her hand on his chest, her touch feather-light. "Your heart is racing," she murmured. Shane couldn't deny it. "It's been a while since I've been this close to anyone." "Me too," Fiona admitted. They stayed that way through the long night, drifting in and out of uncomfortable sleep. Shane was acutely aware of every small movement Fiona made, of the way her breathing eventually evened out as exhaustion claimed her. He allowed himself to study her face in the moonlight, the sweep of her lashes against her cheeks, the spattering of freckles across her nose, the soft curve of her lips. Something was happening to him, something he hadn't felt in years. It both thrilled and terrified him. Dawn broke with merciful warmth, the sun rising over the eastern mountains to illuminate a dramatically changed landscape. The flood had reshaped the valley below, carving new channels and depositing debris in unexpected places. But the water had largely receded, leaving the trail muddy but passable. Fiona stirred against Shane's chest, blinking sleepily before seeming to realize their position. She sat up quickly, color flooding her cheeks. "Good morning," Shane said, trying to sound normal despite the stiffness in his limbs and the lingering awareness of her body against his. "Morning," Fiona replied, smoothing her dress with nervous hands. "The water's gone down." "Yes, we should be able to make our way to midnight and continue on." Shane stood carefully, stretching his aching leg. Sweet Creek is still a day's ride away. They descended the slope cautiously, the loose rock even more treacherous after the flood. Shane went first, testing each foothold before signaling Fiona to follow. When they finally reached the muddy trail, both were breathing hard from exertion. "Now to find my horse," Shane said, scanning the opposite slope where they had last seen midnight. A shrill whistle from Fiona brought an answering whinny. Moments later, the black stallion appeared on the ridge, picking his way down toward them. He looked remarkably unscathed, though his coat was caked with dried mud. "You're a sight for sore eyes," Shane said, patting the horse's neck as he approached. He checked the saddlebags, relieved to find their meager supplies still intact, though somewhat damp. "He's favoring his left foreleg," Fiona observed, kneeling to examine the horse's hoof. "There's a stone bruise forming," Shane frowned. "Will he be able to travel?" "Yes, but we should walk him for a while, and I'd like to make a poultice when we stop." Fiona glanced up at Shane. "If you'll permit it." "I trust your judgment," Shane said, and was rewarded with a smile that made his heart skip. They proceeded slowly, leading midnight along the muddy trail. The flood had washed away landmarks, making navigation more challenging, but Shane was confident in their direction. By midday, they had made decent progress, stopping beside a clear pool of water to rest and allow Fiona to treat Midnight's hoof. Shane watched as she gathered specific plants from nearby, crushing them between two flat stones before applying the paste to the horse's injury. Her movements were sure, her concentration absolute. Midnight stood perfectly still under her ministrations, as if sensing her healing intent. "There," she said finally, wrapping a strip of cloth torn from her petticoat around the hoof to secure the poultice. "That should draw out the heat and ease his discomfort. You have a way with him," Shane observed. "He's not usually so trusting with strangers." "Animals don't judge," Fiona replied, stroking Midnight's nose. "They only care if your intentions are good." "And people?" Shane asked. "Can you sense their intentions too?" Fiona's hand stilled. "Sometimes, not always clearly." She glanced at him. "With you I sense conflict. Pain but not meanness, loneliness." Shane felt exposed, as if she had somehow seen beneath his skin to the tangled mess inside him. "And what do you sense in yourself?" "Fear," Fiona admitted quietly. "Always fear since Boston, but less now." She met his eyes. "I feel safer with you than I have in a long time." The simple admission touched Shane deeply. "I'm glad of that, at least." They continued their journey, the landscape gradually changing as they approached Sweet Creek. The open plains gave way to scattered stands of pine and aspen, the terrain becoming more varied with small hills and hidden valleys. By late afternoon, they crested a rise to see a settlement nestled in a verdant valley below, a creek winding silver through its center. "Sweet Creek," Shane announced, feeling a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. He hadn't seen his brother in over a year, and he wasn't sure how Daniel would react to Fiona's presence. "It's lovely," Fiona said, gazing down at the town. "Bigger than I expected." "It's grown since Daniel first wrote to me about it," Shane agreed. "Silver was discovered in the hills last year, nothing major, but enough to bring prospectors and the businesses that follow them." They made their way down into the valley, Midnight moving more easily after Fiona's treatment. As they approached the town proper, Shane noticed Fiona growing tense beside him. "What is it?" he asked. "Just remembering my reception in Shoshone," she replied. "I'm afraid word might have traveled. Sweet Creek is different," Shane assured her, though he couldn't be certain. "And you're with me now." The main street was busy with the usual traffic of a prosperous frontier town, wagons loaded with supplies, cowboys fresh from the range, ladies in calico dresses shopping at the general store. A few people nodded to Shane, eyeing Fiona with curiosity but not hostility. "Daniel's ranch is just outside town," Shane said, guiding Midnight toward a side street, about a mile up the North Valley. They had just passed the last buildings when a voice called out, "Shane Norwood, is that you?" Shane turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man with the same dark hair and gray eyes as his own, striding toward them from the direction of the blacksmith shop. "Daniel," Shane said, breaking into a genuine smile. The brothers embraced briefly but firmly, Daniel clapping Shane on the back with enough force to make him wince. "You're late," Daniel said, stepping back to assess his younger brother. "We expected you 3 days ago." "Ran into some trouble," Shane replied. "Flash flood yesterday." Daniel's gaze shifted to Fiona, who stood a few paces away, her posture suggesting she might bolt at any moment. "And who might this be?" Shane hesitated, unsure how to explain Fiona's presence without embarrassing her. "This is Miss Fiona O'Sullivan." She was, traveling to Sweet Creek as well. Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly, but he offered Fiona a polite nod. "Miss O'Sullivan, welcome to Sweet Creek." "Thank you, Mr. Norwood," Fiona replied, her voice steady despite her evident nervousness. "Daniel, please," he corrected. "Any friend of Shane's is welcome." He glanced between them, clearly noting their disheveled appearance and the way Fiona wore a man's flannel shirt beneath her dress for warmth. "Sarah will be pleased to meet you. She's been saying we need more women in this town." "Sarah?" Fiona questioned. "My wife," Daniel explained. "Come on, the wagon's this way. You both look like you could use a hot meal and a proper bed." As they followed Daniel to where a wagon waited outside the blacksmith's, Shane felt Fiona touch his arm lightly. "You didn't tell him," she whispered. "It wasn't my story to tell," Shane replied quietly. "You can decide what you want people here to know about you." Gratitude flickered in her eyes. Thank you. The ride to the Norwood ranch was mercifully short. Shane found himself growing increasingly anxious about how Sarah would receive Fiona, and by extension, how his brother's wife would judge his actions. But he needn't have worried. Sarah Norwood proved to be a warm, practical woman with a ready smile and an immediate understanding that appeared to require no explanations. She took one look at Fiona's tired face and threadbare dress and swept her into the house with motherly efficiency. "You poor dear, you must be exhausted. Let's get you a hot bath and some clean clothes before supper. I have a dress that might fit you with just a bit of taking in at the waist." Fiona threw a bewildered glance over her shoulder at Shane before being ushered inside. Shane couldn't help but smile at her expression, equal parts relief and confusion at being so readily accepted. "Interesting company you're keeping these days," Daniel commented as they led Midnight to the barn. "She's pretty." Shane felt a defensive response rise in his throat but swallowed it. "It's not what you think." "And what do I think?" Daniel asked, a knowing look in his eyes. "That there's something between us," Shane replied gruffly. Daniel shrugged, helping to unsaddle the stallion. "Maybe not yet, but I saw how you look at her, little brother." Shane busied himself checking Midnight's hoof, unwilling to meet Daniel's gaze. "She needed help, that's all." Daniel hummed skeptically. "Well, whatever the story is, Sarah's already decided she's staying. Fair warning," Shane groaned. "Your wife always did move too fast." "She knows a good soul when she sees one," Daniel said simply. "Now come on, let's get you cleaned up too. You smell like wet horse." An hour later, freshly bathed and wearing clean clothes borrowed from his brother, Shane sat at the kitchen table watching Sarah bustle about preparing supper. The Norwood ranch house was modest but well built, with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a comfortable sitting area. The furniture was a mix of handcrafted pieces and store-bought items, reflecting both Daniel's skill as a woodworker and the prosperity they had achieved. "How many cattle do you have now?" Shane asked, sipping the coffee Sarah had pressed into his hands. 200 head, Daniel replied proudly. "Planning to double that by next year if the grazing holds good. We've got 20 acres of hay under cultivation too." "Impressive," Shane said sincerely. His brother had always been the more settled of the two, with clear goals and the determination to achieve them. Shane had drifted since the war, taking odd jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. "We could use your help," Daniel continued. "Permanently, I mean. There's plenty of land. You could build your own place, run your own herd eventually." Before Shane could respond, the bedroom door opened and Fiona emerged. Shane felt his breath catch. She wore one of Sarah's dresses, a simple blue calico that brought out the green of her eyes. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, still damp from her bath, and her skin glowed with renewed vitality. "Feel better?" Sarah asked with a knowing smile. "Like a new woman," Fiona replied, her Irish lilt more pronounced in her relaxed state. "Thank you for your kindness." "Nonsense," Sarah waved away the thanks. "Any friend of Shane's is family to us." She gave Shane a pointed look that made him shift uncomfortably in his chair. "Now sit down, both of you. Supper's nearly ready." The meal was simple but abundant: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and to Shane's delight, apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, with Daniel and Sarah sharing stories about Sweet Creek and their neighbors. Shane noticed how they carefully avoided asking direct questions about how he and Fiona had met, though he could see the curiosity in his brother's eyes. After supper, Sarah insisted that Fiona take the guest bedroom while Shane bunked with Daniel in his workshop. "I won't hear of either of you sleeping in the barn after what you've been through," she declared when Shane protested. Later, as Shane spread his bedroll on the workshop floor, Daniel leaned against his workbench, arms crossed. "So," he said, "are you going to tell me the real story now?" Shane sighed, sitting on his makeshift bed. "I bought her at auction in Shoshone." Daniel's eyebrows shot up. "You what?" "Not like that," Shane said quickly. "She was being sold to pay for her passage west. No one would bid on her because of some ridiculous accusations about witchcraft." "Witchcraft?" Daniel repeated incredulously. "She has knowledge of healing, plants, remedies." Shane ran a hand through his hair. A child died under her care back east, and people blamed her instead of the fever that took him. Daniel studied his brother's face, and you decided to rescue her. I couldn't just leave her there, Shane said defensively. No, you couldn't, Daniel agreed. That's always been your way, Shane, fighting other people's battles. Is that a criticism, an observation? Daniel pushed away from the workbench. What happens now, with Miss O'Sullivan, I mean? Shane shrugged, though the question had been haunting him since they'd arrived in Sweet Creek. I don't know. I told her I'd bring her this far, that she could decide what she wanted after that. And what do you want? The question hung in the air between them. Shane looked away, unwilling to voice the complicated feelings that had been growing since he'd first seen Fiona standing defiant on that auction block. I want her to be safe, he said finally, to have a chance at a decent life. Daniel's expression softened. You deserve that too, you know. Shane didn't answer, and after a moment, Daniel sighed. Get some rest. We've got work to do tomorrow. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon, drawing Shane from a deep, dreamless sleep, the first he'd had in days. He made his way to the kitchen to find Sarah at the stove and Fiona already at the table, helping to shell peas. Good morning, Fiona said, her smile warming something inside Shane's chest. Morning, he replied, accepting the cup of coffee Sarah thrust into his hands. Daniel's already out checking the north pasture, Sarah informed him. Said to tell you he could use your help after breakfast. Shane nodded, taking a seat across from Fiona. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months, Fiona admitted. A real bed is a luxury I'd forgotten. You're welcome to it for as long as you like, Sarah said, placing a plate of eggs and bacon before Shane. Sweet Creek could use someone with healing knowledge. Dr. Fielding only comes through once a month. Fiona's hand stilled on the peas. You know about that, Sarah smiled gently. Small towns have few secrets, and Daniel told me what Shane shared with him. She sat down, her expression serious. People here are practical, Fiona. They care more about results than rumors. If you can help when they're sick or injured, that's what matters. Hope flickered across Fiona's face. You think I could start again here, practice healing openly? I think you could do whatever you set your mind to, Sarah replied, and we'd help you. Shane watched the exchange silently, feeling both relief that Fiona might find a place in Sweet Creek and a strange hollowness at the thought that she wouldn't need him anymore. After breakfast, Shane joined Daniel in the north pasture, spending the day learning the rhythms of the ranch. The work was hard but satisfying, mending fences, checking cattle, planning the next day's drive to move a herd to fresh grazing land. By sunset, Shane's muscles ached in ways they hadn't in years, but it was a good feeling, a reminder that he was capable of creating rather than destroying. When they returned to the house, they found Sarah teaching Fiona to make dumplings for the stew bubbling on the stove. The kitchen was warm and fragrant, filled with the sounds of women's laughter. Shane stood in the doorway for a moment, struck by the domesticity of the scene and the longing it awakened in him. Quite a picture, isn't it? Daniel murmured beside him. Shane merely nodded, unable to articulate the tangle of emotions in his chest. Supper was a lively affair, with Daniel sharing stories of the day's work and Sarah teasing both brothers about their appetites. Fiona seemed more relaxed than Shane had yet seen her, offering her own observations and even a few anecdotes from her childhood in Ireland. The sound of her laughter made something loosen in Shane's chest, a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. After the meal, as Sarah and Fiona washed dishes, Daniel pulled Shane onto the porch with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. To new beginnings, Daniel said, pouring generous measures for both of them. Shane accepted the glass, clinking it against his brother's. New beginnings. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge over the valley. Finally, Daniel spoke. Sarah and I have been talking. We think Fiona should stay on here, at least until she decides what she wants to do. She'd be welcome, Shane agreed carefully. And you, Daniel pressed. Will you stay too? Shane stared into his whiskey, considering the question. The idea of settling in Sweet Creek, of working alongside his brother and seeing Fiona every day, held a powerful appeal. Yet there was something unresolved between them, something he needed to understand before he could commit to staying. I need to think on it, he said finally. Daniel nodded, not pushing further. They finished their drinks as the night deepened around them, each lost in their own thoughts. When Shane finally returned inside, he found Fiona alone in the sitting area, a book open on her lap but her gaze distant as she stared into the dying fire. "Everything all right?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Fiona looked up, her expression clearing. "Yes, just thinking." Shane settled into the chair opposite her. "About what?" "The future," she replied. "Sarah has offered to help me set up as a healer here. There's a small cabin available near the creek that I could rent." "That's good," Shane said, ignoring the conflicted feeling her words triggered. "You deserve a fresh start." Fiona studied his face. "And you, will you stay in Sweet Creek?" "I don't know yet," Shane admitted. "Daniel wants me to." "But you're not sure?" It wasn't a question. Shane looked away into the glowing embers of the fire. "I haven't stayed anywhere long since the war, not sure I remember how." "Perhaps it's time to learn again," Fiona suggested gently. When Shane met her eyes, he saw understanding there and something more, a warmth that both invited and challenged him. Before he could respond, Sarah's voice called from the kitchen. "Fiona, could you help me with something?" The moment broke. Fiona rose, setting aside her book. "We can talk more tomorrow if you like." "I'd like that," Shane replied. He remained by the fire long after she'd gone, thinking about roots and healing and the possibility of a future he hadn't allowed himself to imagine before. The next week fell into a pattern. Shane worked with Daniel on the ranch during the days, learning the business and finding satisfaction in the physical labor. Fiona spent time with Sarah, gathering healing herbs from the surrounding hills and preparing the small cabin by the creek for her occupation. In the evenings, they would all gather for supper, sharing the day's events and gradually becoming more comfortable with each other. Shane found himself watching Fiona when she wasn't looking, the graceful way she moved, the thoughtful expression when she listened to others speak, the rare but beautiful smile that transformed her face when something amused her. He caught Daniel and Sarah exchanging knowing glances, but ignored their gentle teasing. On Sunday, the whole town gathered for a social at the newly built meeting house. Sarah insisted that they all attend, overriding Shane's protests that he didn't dance. "Nonsense," she declared. "Everyone dances. And Fiona needs to meet the rest of Sweet Creek if she's going to live here." So Shane found himself in his best shirt borrowed from Daniel, watching as Sarah introduced Fiona to what seemed like every resident of the small town. To his surprise, Fiona was received warmly, particularly after Sarah discreetly mentioned her healing abilities to several key members of the community. "Mrs. Peterson's youngest has had a cough for weeks," Sarah explained as they stood near the refreshment table. "And Mr. Hollister's arthritis has been troubling him something fierce this spring. They're more interested in help than rumors." Shane nodded, relief washing through him. "She deserves that chance." "She deserves happiness too," Sarah said pointedly, glancing toward where Fiona stood chatting with the town's schoolteacher. "As do you." Before Shane could formulate a response, the fiddlers struck up a lively tune and couples began taking to the floor for a reel. Daniel appeared, claiming Sarah for the dance with a gallant bow that made her laugh. "Ask her to dance," Sarah called over her shoulder as Daniel led her away. Shane hesitated, watching as several men approached Fiona. To his surprise, she politely declined each invitation, her eyes occasionally scanning the room until they landed on him. A small smile curved her lips, and before Shane could second-guess himself, he was crossing the floor toward her. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, feeling unaccountably nervous. "I thought you didn't dance," Fiona replied, her eyes twinkling. "I'm willing to make an exception," Shane said, offering his hand. Fiona placed her palm in his, and Shane felt that now familiar jolt at her touch. He led her onto the floor, acutely aware of his limitations with only one arm, but determined to try nonetheless. "I should warn you," he said as they took their positions. "I haven't done this since before the war." "Then we'll learn together," Fiona replied softly, and somehow they did. Shane found that his body remembered the steps better than his mind, and Fiona moved with him as if they had danced together 100 times before. When the music changed to a slower waltz, she stepped closer, allowing him to lead with his one arm securely around her waist. People are watching us, Fiona murmured, a hint of her old wariness returning. Let them, Shane replied, echoing his words from the ledge above the flood. We're not doing anything wrong. Her smile returned and she relaxed into his embrace. They moved together in perfect harmony, the rest of the room fading away until it was just the two of them, the music, and the undeniable connection growing between them. When the dance ended, Shane reluctantly released her, though he kept her hand in his. Would you like to step outside for some air? Fiona nodded, and he led her through the crowd to the porch of the meeting house. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Sweet Creek spread out below them, lamplight glowing in windows, the silver ribbon of the creek winding through the center. It's beautiful here, Fiona said, leaning against the railing. Peaceful. Do you think you could be happy in a place like this? Shane asked, watching her profile in the moonlight. She turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. I think happiness depends less on the place and more on the people you share it with. There was a question in her eyes, one that Shane wasn't sure he was ready to answer. Yet standing there with her, feeling more at peace than he had in years, he found himself wanting to try. Fiona, he began. These past days, a commotion from inside interrupted him. The music had stopped and voices were raised in alarm. Shane instinctively moved in front of Fiona as the meeting house doors burst open and people spilled onto the porch. What's happening? Shane asked, catching Daniel's arm as he emerged. Accident at the Mitchell place, Daniel replied grimly. Their boy fell from the hayloft. They're bringing him in now. As if summoned by his words, a wagon came rattling up the road, a man driving frantically while a woman cradled something in the back. The crowd parted as the wagon pulled up to the meeting house. Someone get Dr. Fielding, a voice called. He's in Cheyenne until Tuesday, came the reply. Shane felt Fiona stiffen beside him, then she was moving forward, pushing through the crowd toward the wagon. He followed, watching as she approached the distraught mother holding a small, still form. Please, Fiona said quietly, I can help. The woman looked up, tears streaming down her face. Are you a doctor? No, Fiona admitted, but I have knowledge of healing. The father, climbing down from the wagon, looked skeptical. We need a real doctor. Your son needs help now, Fiona insisted gently. At least let me try while someone rides for the doctor. There was a moment of tense silence, then Sarah stepped forward. Mrs. Mitchell, Fiona has helped many people. Please let her look at Tommy. Perhaps it was the desperation of the moment or Sarah's confident endorsement, but Mrs. Mitchell nodded. Please help him. They carried the boy, no more than 8 or 9. Shane guessed into the meeting house, clearing a table for him to lie on. Fiona moved with quiet authority, asking for hot water, clean cloths, and her medicine bag, which fortunately she had brought to show Sarah. Shane watched as she examined the unconscious child, her hands moving with gentle efficiency over his head, chest, and limbs. Her expression was focused, all traces of the uncertain woman he had first met gone completely. His right arm is broken, she announced. And there's a bump on his head that concerns me. Has he awakened at all since the fall? No, Mr. Mitchell replied, his earlier skepticism fading in the face of Fiona's competence. He made a sound when I picked him up, but then nothing. Fiona nodded, opening her medicine bag. I'm going to make a poultice for his head to reduce the swelling, then set the arm. Someone should ride for the doctor still, but we can't wait to begin treatment. For the next hour, Shane watched as Fiona worked tirelessly over the boy. She set the broken arm with sure hands, binding it carefully with splints and bandages. She applied a strong-smelling poultice to the head wound, all while speaking softly to the unconscious child, as if her voice alone could guide him back. The crowd had thinned, many returning to their homes, though a core group remained the Mitchells, the Norwoods, and a few others. The atmosphere was tense with waiting, all eyes on the still form of the boy and the woman tending him. Finally, as the clock on the wall approached midnight, Tommy Mitchell stirred. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. "Mama," he called weakly. Mrs. Mitchell rushed forward with a cry, gathering her son's hand in hers. "I'm here, Tommy. You're going to be all right." Fiona stepped back, allowing the family their moment of reunion. She looked exhausted, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she packed away her supplies. Shane moved to her side, steadying her with a hand at her elbow. "You did it," he said softly. She looked up at him, a mixture of relief and uncertainty in her eyes. For now, the doctor should still examine him when he returns. Mr. Mitchell approached them, his expression transformed. "Miss O'Sullivan," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary," Fiona replied. "Just keep him quiet for a few days. The poultice should be changed morning and night. I can show your wife how." "You will always be welcome in our home," Mrs. Mitchell called from her son's side. "Always." As they left the meeting house, Tommy now sleeping naturally with his mother beside him, the remaining townspeople regarded Fiona with new respect. Several approached to introduce themselves, expressing interest in her healing abilities. By the time they reached the wagon for the ride back to the Norwood ranch, it was clear that Fiona had found her place in Sweet Creek. "I'd say you made quite an impression," Daniel commented as they drove home under the stars. "They needed help," Fiona said simply. "I was fortunate to be there." "And Tommy Mitchell was fortunate you were," Sarah added. "That boy might not have made it until the doctor returned." Shane sat beside Fiona on the wagon bench, acutely aware of her exhaustion. Without thinking, he put his arm around her shoulders, offering support. She leaned into him gratefully, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, too quietly for the others to hear. "For what?" Shane asked. "For believing in me from the beginning, for giving me the chance to start again." Shane tightened his arm around her, words failing him in the face of her gratitude. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the stars wheeling overhead and the promise of tomorrow bright before them. The following days brought a steady stream of visitors to the Norwood ranch, all wanting to meet the woman who had saved Tommy Mitchell. Fiona handled the attention with grace, though Shane could see it sometimes overwhelmed her. He found himself becoming protective, suggesting rides to the creek or walks in the hills when the visitors became too numerous. During these quiet moments together, their connection deepened. Fiona told him more about her childhood in Ireland, the grandmother who had taught her healing arts, the difficult journey to America. In turn, Shane shared stories of his time in the cavalry, the comrades he had lost, the nightmares that still sometimes woke him in the night. "Does your arm pain you?" Fiona asked during one such walk, a week after the social. They had stopped to rest beside the creek, sitting on a fallen log in dappled sunlight. Shane looked down at the empty sleeve. "Not the arm itself." "They call it phantom pain, feeling hurt from something that's no longer there." "May I?" Fiona asked, her hand hovering near his right shoulder. After a moment's hesitation, Shane nodded. Her touch was gentle as she explored what remained of his right arm, her fingers moving with clinical precision over the scarred tissue of the stump. "The surgeon did good work," she observed. "Clean, but there's tension here that's unnecessary." Her fingers pressed more firmly at a point just below his shoulder. "Do you feel that?" Shane nodded, surprised at the immediate relief her touch brought. "How did you know?" "The body remembers trauma," Fiona explained, continuing her careful massage. "It holds tightness long after the wound itself has healed." Shane closed his eyes, surrendering to the healing in her hands. The sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced, not just the easing of physical discomfort, but something deeper, as if she were somehow reaching the wounded places inside him that no one else had ever seen. "Your leg troubles you too," Fiona said after a while. "I've noticed your limp worsens in the evenings." "Old battle wound," Shane confirmed. "Never healed quite right. I could help with that as well if you'd allow it." Shane opened his eyes to find her watching him, her expression a mixture of professional confidence and personal uncertainty. He realized she was asking for trust not just in her abilities but in her as a person. "I would be grateful," he said simply. That evening, after supper, Fiona prepared a warm bath infused with herbs she had gathered earlier. Daniel and Sarah tactfully retired early, leaving Shane and Fiona alone in the kitchen. With her guidance, Shane eased his leg into the fragrant water, rolling up his pant leg to expose the jagged scar that ran from knee to hip. "The Arapaho healer used something similar," Shane commented, inhaling the earthy scent of the herbs. Though his smelled considerably worse, Fiona's laugh was like music. Effectiveness doesn't always require unpleasantness. She knelt beside the basin, her hands moving below the water to massage his leg with firm, sure strokes. "Tell me where it hurts most." Shane indicated the area just above his knee where the bullet had shattered bone. As Fiona worked, the heat of the water and the skilled pressure of her fingers brought relief he hadn't thought possible. He found himself relaxing completely, the constant background pain that had been his companion for years gradually receding. "You have a gift," he said softly, watching her concentrated expression. Fiona glanced up, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "My grandmother would say the gift is in knowing when to use it and for whom." "And how do you decide that?" Her hands stilled for a moment. "I look for those who are open to healing. Not everyone is, you know. Some people cling to their pain because it's familiar." Shane considered her words. "And me, what did you see in me?" "Someone who has carried pain long enough," Fiona replied simply. "Someone ready to set it down." Their eyes held, the moment stretching between them with unspoken understanding. Shane reached out, touching her cheek with gentle fingers. Fiona leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. "Fiona," Shane began, his voice rougher than he intended. "I need to ask you something." She looked at him expectantly, her hands still beneath the water on his leg. "I've been thinking about staying in Sweet Creek. Daniel has offered me a partnership in the ranch, a piece of land to call my own." He paused, gathering courage. "But before I decide, I need to know if there might be a place for me in your future as well." Surprise flickered across Fiona's face, followed by something softer, warmer. "Are you asking to court me, Shane Norwood?" "Inelegantly, perhaps," Shane admitted with a small smile. "But yes, I am." Fiona withdrew her hands from the water, drying them slowly on a nearby towel. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "When you found me in Shoshone, I had nothing but my trunk and a reputation that made me untouchable," she said finally. "You gave me more than freedom that day. You gave me dignity, respect." She looked up, meeting his eyes steadily. "I would be honored to be courted by you if you're certain that's what you want." "I've never been more certain of anything," Shane replied, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The smile that bloomed across Fiona's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Shane leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. Instead, Fiona closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Shane rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably tell Daniel I'm staying," he murmured. Fiona laughed softly. "I think he already knows." The months that followed were the happiest of Shane's life. He and Daniel expanded the ranch operations, purchasing additional cattle and hiring 2 cowhands to help with the increasing workload. Shane built a small cabin on the eastern edge of the Norwood property, close enough to the main house for family meals but with enough distance for privacy. Fiona, meanwhile, established herself as Sweet Creek's healer. The cabin by the creek became her workspace, filled with dried herbs and tinctures. Word of her abilities spread, bringing patients from neighboring settlements. She never charged for her services, though most insisted on paying with goods or labor. By autumn, the suspicious whispers from her past had been replaced by grateful testimonials from those she had helped. Their courtship proceeded at a pace that felt right to both of them. Shane called on Fiona formally 3 evenings a week, taking her for walks along the creek or bringing her wildflowers from the hills. They attended town socials together, no longer the subject of curious stares, but accepted as a couple whose connection was obvious to anyone who saw them. On cool evenings, they sat on the porch of Fiona's cabin, talking of the future. Shane spoke of expanding his herd, of the house he planned to build on the rise overlooking the valley. Fiona shared her dreams of a proper infirmary where she could treat more patients, perhaps even train others in her healing arts. And always, there was the growing love between them expressed in glances, in the brush of hands, in kisses that became increasingly difficult to end. As winter approached, bringing the first dusting of snow to the mountains surrounding Sweet Creek, Shane knew it was time. He spent weeks carving a ring from a piece of applewood, inlaying it with a small piece of silver from the local mine. On the first Sunday of December, he asked Fiona to ride with him to the lookout point above the valley. The day was clear and cold, the landscape transformed by a fresh snowfall that glittered in the winter sunlight. They sat on a blanket Shane had brought, sharing hot coffee from a thermos and watching the smoke rise from chimneys in the town below. "It's beautiful," Fiona said, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. "Like something from a fairy tale. Do you miss Ireland?" Shane asked, watching her face. "The green hills, the sea," Fiona considered the question. "I miss knowing where my parents are buried. I miss the sound of my grandmother's voice." She turned to him, her smile gentle. "But home isn't always where you begin. Sometimes it's where you choose to build it." Shane reached for her hand, his heart pounding. "I'd like to build a home with you, Fiona O'Sullivan, not just a house but a life." Understanding dawned in her eyes as he withdrew the wooden ring from his pocket. "Shane." "I love you," he said simply. "Your strength, your compassion, your healing hands that somehow knew exactly what I needed before I did." He held out the ring. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sparkled in Fiona's eyes, catching the winter sunlight. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." Shane slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms, kissing her with all the love he had kept guarded for so long. When they finally parted, Fiona rested her head against his chest, her hand splayed over his heart. "Your heart isn't racing anymore," she observed with a smile in her voice. "Because it knows it's found its home," Shane replied, holding her close as the world stretched white and promising before them. They were married on New Year's Day, 1876, in the Sweet Creek Meeting House decorated with pine boughs and ribbon. Daniel stood as Shane's best man while Sarah attended Fiona. The entire town turned out for the celebration, filling the small building to capacity and spilling out onto the snow-covered street. Fiona wore a dress of deep green velvet that Sarah had ordered from Denver, with a crown of winter berries in her dark hair. Shane, in a new suit that actually fit him properly, waited at the altar, scarcely able to believe that this remarkable woman had chosen him. As they exchanged vows, Shane found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them together from that dusty auction block in Shoshone to this moment of perfect joy. The road had not been straight or easy, but every step had led exactly where they needed to be. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." As Shane gathered Fiona into his arms, the cheers of the townspeople faded away, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, two souls who had found in each other the healing they both so desperately needed. The celebration continued well into the night, with dancing and feasting, and more than a few emotional toasts from those whose lives Fiona had touched with her healing hands. When they finally departed for the cabin Shane had built their home now, the townspeople lined the street, holding lanterns to light their way through the snow. That night, as they lay tangled together in the warmth of their bed while winter winds howled outside, Shane traced the curve of Fiona's cheek with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked. Fiona smiled, her eyes luminous in the firelight. "More than I ever dreamed possible." She placed her hand over his heart, her touch as healing and necessary to him as breathing. "And you? I never thought I'd find this after the war," Shane admitted. "Peace, purpose, love." He kissed her softly. "You've given me all three. We've given them to each other," Fiona corrected. "That's the true healing, not just receiving, but giving in return." As Shane drifted toward sleep with his wife in his arms, he reflected that she was right, as she so often was. The healing they had found together wasn't one-sided. It was a continuous circle of giving and receiving, of trust and love, of building something new from the broken pieces of the past. Spring came early to Sweet Creek that year, bringing new life to the valley. The Norwood ranch flourished under the brothers' partnership, their herd growing as calving season brought dozens of new additions. Fiona's practice expanded as well, with a proper sign now hanging outside her creekside clinic in regular hours, 3 days a week. On a warm April evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Fiona took Shane's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her eyes shining with secret joy. Shane felt his heart skip, then race with hope. Fiona, are you? She nodded, her smile brighter than the setting sun. By my calculation, we should welcome our child around Thanksgiving. Shane gathered her in his arms, overwhelmed with emotion. A baby, he whispered against her hair. Our baby. The beginning of our family, Fiona agreed, her hand covering his where it rested on her still flat stomach. A new life born of healing and love. In that moment, with the woman he loved in his arms and the promise of their child growing beneath his hand, Shane Norwood knew with absolute certainty that he had found his place in the world. Not just a geographical location, but a state of being whole, healed, and finally at peace. The cowboy who had once bought a woman no one would touch had discovered the greatest truth of all. That in giving freedom, he had found his own, and in offering healing, he had been healed in return. And as the stars began to appear above Sweet Creek, Shane and Fiona Norwood looked toward the future with hearts full of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them home to this place, to each other, and to the love that had made them both whole again.